Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today I'm making a video about another Yashica camera. Today's camera is the Yashica Electro 35 GTN rangefinder camera. For those of you who saw my video about the Yashica GSN, the GTN is the same camera except that it comes in a black finish, or what Yashica called a professional finish, assuming that professional photographers prefer the black finish over the silver. But anyway, the Yashica Electro 35 GTN was an improved version of the Yashica GT. The improvement consisted of the addition of a hot shoe for the flash instead of the older style flash sync socket located on the side, which the GTN still has if you're using an earlier flash. But the hot shoe makes it more convenient to use a more modern or strobe flash. The Yashica GTN is an Aperture priority automatic camera, which means you select the aperture you want for the available light, and the camera automatically selects the best shutter speed. The Yashica Electro 35 GTN is a very well made camera, and it has an outstanding lens, 45mm f1.7 lens, which has made the camera quite popular over the last year or so. The prices on these have gone through the roof here in Japan as people have begun to appreciate these cameras again, and even broken ones are getting a fair amount of money nowadays, which is kind of silly. I used to sell quite a few of these when I could get them more cheaply, but now the prices here in Japan seem to be higher than the prices I can get for them in America or Europe, so it isn't often that I can come across one here for a good price which I can resell on my Etsy or eBay stores, but yeah, I got lucky with this one. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the features and functions and controls of the Electro GTN. Starting at the top, we have the film rewind knob, which also doubles as a release for the film door. And we have the previously mentioned hot shoe for the flash. Next to that, we have a couple of warning lamps for the light meter. These are visible on the outside of the camera and on the inside, so you can view the lamps either way, from looking down at the top or looking through the viewfinder. When the red overlight comes on, it means that there's too much light in your scene, and you have to close down the aperture, or your image will be overexposed. The yellow lamp is the slow lamp, which means that your shutter speed is at 1/30th of a second or slower, and that your image might get blurred unless you open up the shutter a little bit. The longest shutter speed in the GTN is more than a minute long, so you don't have to worry about not being able to take a long exposure. You just have to worry about holding the camera still enough to do it. Moving next, we see the film speed selector dial, which has a range of ISO 25 to 1000. A lot of people believe that the GTN was the first of the Electro 35s to come with film speed up to ISO 1000, but that was actually introduced with the GT. There were two versions of the GT, an earlier and a later version. The earlier version had a more limited film speed, and you can tell the earlier version cameras because they used slotted screws to hold on the top cover, and they had a cutout on the bottom plate, which allowed you to put in the 35mm film cartridges more easily. The later GTs and the GTN used a much more modern latch and door system to load film. But anyway, let's go ahead and continue. Next we have the shutter speed button, and we have a locking lever which will lock the button and prevent you from accidentally taking exposure if the shutter is wound. Here we have the film winding and shutter charging lever, and here we have the film counter window. On the back of the camera we have the viewfinder window. The Yashica Electro 35, the full-size cameras feature a really nice viewfinder with parallax correction, and as I mentioned earlier, the meter lamps are visible within the viewfinder. And also, they have a lot of, they use a special glass inside the viewfinder, which increases the contrast of the rangefinder. So you are more easily able to focus the Electro 35 series than some other rangefinder cameras of the period. The rangefinder patch is much brighter. Next to that we have the test button for the battery. and if you push the red button, you should see the green light illuminate inside the film counter window. Moving to the front of the camera, we have the window here for the light meter, and the light meter in the Electro 35 series is very well made, very well engineered, and very accurate. You can easily shoot slow slide films with the camera and get perfect exposures every time. However, since the light meter is not located within what the lens sees, it reads the light outside. If you're going to use a filter over the lens, you have to compensate by adjusting the film speed range for whatever light is lost through the filter. And also it makes it difficult to use neutral density filters when you are shooting with the full-size electros, though skylight filters and things like that work quite well. Next to that, we have the viewfinder and rangefinder window, and this matte glass here allows the light for the projected frame lines. To the front here, on the lens body at the base, we have the focusing ring, and it focuses from just under 3 feet to infinity, and here we have a depth of field scale just above the focus marks, which makes it kind of easy to compute your depth of field. And then here we have the aperture settings, and of course we have for indoors, cloudy situations, or sunlight. And here we have a self-timer. The self-timers on the Yashica Electro 35s, they generally work, but I avoid using them whenever possible because it is really the only weak point in the shutter. The shutters were incredibly well made, the self-timers were not so well made, and if these stick, then the camera, unless you can force them over until the shutter starts working again, a broken self-timer can disable the camera. In the front here we have a 3-way selector ring which switches between the flash sync speed, the auto speed, and bulb. So unlike other electronic shutter cameras of this era or later eras, the Yashica was good enough to include a bulb setting, which can allow you to do really long exposures on a tripod. When you're shooting the camera and you have problems with it, make sure that first make sure that you have it set to the auto setting. Some people have it set to the flash sync setting accidentally, and they think the camera's not working, but it's because the shutter always fires at the same speed regardless of where they have it pointed. And sometimes they have it on the bulb speeds, and then the shutter sticks open and only lets go when they let go of the shutter. On the bottom of the camera here we have the release mechanism, so you can unlock the film winding mechanism and rewind the film. A 1/4-inch tripod socket, and here we have the battery chamber cover. The batteries, which were originally designed for the Electro G series or Electro 35 series, were discontinued, but a couple of years ago Amazon began selling a battery which works in these cameras. It's called the Excel A32PX. It fits perfectly and it doesn't require an adapter, and the camera will work perfectly well with one of these batteries. So perhaps that's one of the reasons why these cameras have become more popular than they were recently. But anyway, when I first saw one of these cameras, I was in what is called a recycle shop in Japan, which is a place which resells old stuff. And there was a big junk bin in the electronics section, and in that junk bin I found one of these cameras. And it had been dropped a couple of times. It had dents, and the glass was broken in the viewfinder, but I was impressed by the design and the weight and how the camera was laid out, and I was tempted to buy the camera just to play around with it and see what it was like. But they wanted 3,000 yen for it, and 3,000 yen was too much money for something which is obviously never going to be anything more than a paperweight. But eventually I came across a working camera for less than 3,000 yen, so I picked it up, and I guess you can say like the rest is history. And I didn't imagine at the time that I would be selling these cameras, or that I would become an expert on them, but I guess you can say that I am. But anyway, that's it for my video about the Yashica Electro 35 GTN. I've just listed this camera on my Etsy and eBay stores, and it'll probably go quickly because I don't come across these so often anymore. If you're interested in this camera, please check it out. If you're interested in another vintage Japanese camera, I have links to my stores in the description below the video. If you are interested in seeing more videos about vintage Japanese cameras, please subscribe. I'll be posting more videos soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again.